All right, welcome back to Prayer of the Barren Womb. We are in part 18 of the Four Rivers of Eden, and I want to revisit. There's some stuff that's hot off the press here that I didn't touch on in my previous video on the Genesis chapter 6, and it has to do with the distinction and the reversal of the names between Elohim and Yahovah. Of course, in Genesis 1, we get the Elohim introduction. In Genesis 2, we get the Yahovah introduction. And those two, the introduction, the evaluation, I should say, the evaluations of humanity in Genesis 6 begin with Yahovah evaluation and end up with Elohim evaluation. And one of the things that I wanted to point out that just recently occurred to me is the difference between the evaluations between Yahovah evaluating humanity and Elohim. There's a much more personal connection or language being used in Yahovah's evaluation of humanity, the Yod He Vav He, where he talks about striving in Genesis 6, verse 2. Actually, 3. Genesis 6, verse 3. And Yahovah said, "My spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh." And you look upon that, this personal connection that Yahovah has with humanity and his striving with each individual heart on a very personal connection. The Spirit of God, Yahovah, is striving with mankind to get him to return to his ways. And the hardness of man's heart is solidifying the Creator's intent to destroy. He's striving, he's working in the heart of each individual human. And so you see that kind of distinction mentioned again, how sad it makes Yahovah that his striving and contending within the heart of each human is causing him sorrow and grief. And so you have these personal words being used in the expression of Yahovah's evaluation. And Yahovah saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts, every thought, every intent of the heart was only evil continually. And Yahovah was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. So you see these very personal, very intimate details about the heart of Yahovah, and then you get this change from Yahovah to Elohim in verse 11 through 13, and it's very general. This is where we get the earth was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. So God looked upon the earth, and indeed it was very corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. And Elohim said to Noah, "The end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth." So Elohim is looking upon the earth in a very general way, as opposed to Yahovah looking upon the earth in a very personal way. And you get this a different perspective between how Yod He Vav He Elohim and Elohim each look upon the destruction event of the flood. So I wanted to bring that forward to us. I think this is going to be meaningful downstream when we look at the theme of reversal again. But I just wanted to draw your attention to that as we move forward. What's also very interesting is that when we switch names in Genesis 6, or we reverse order of introduction in Genesis 6, to the first introduction of evaluation comes from Yahovah and then Elohim, each one of these attributes of God give an assignment to Noah. After we switch from Yahovah to Elohim in verse 11, we have an assignment that Elohim gives to Noah, and it's not surprisingly at all, it's a doing assignment. It's something that has to be done with the energy of Noah and his family. Elohim assigns to Noah the project of making the ark. There's a lot of doing involved. I mean, this project takes over 100 years. And then after we get into chapter 7, we have another name switch. We're back now to Yahovah, and a different assignment is given to Noah. The assignment now is come into the ark. Be with me in this place of protection through the judgment. So you get, anyhow, this is hot off the press. This is something that just occurred to me as I was doing the study, is that you get different assignments. A doing assignment from doing Elohim, and a being assignment from being Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh Elohim. And it just struck me as a powerful parallel, things that are hidden in the text that don't even come out, don't even emerge until we grow sensitive to some of these nuances. So I was excited to discover that. Now we left our hero, Noah, on the surface of the great deep, and we developed the parallels between the creation week in Genesis 1 and the recreation week in Genesis 8. And I began to wonder, are there parallels between not only Genesis 1 and Genesis 8, but are there parallels to Genesis 2? And this is more suggestive than it is concrete. But what we find in Genesis 7, in the destruction of the earth, is the collapse of day 2 of Genesis 1. This might be hard to follow. But in Genesis chapter 2, Genesis chapter 1, day 2, in verse 6, then Elohim said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And Elohim made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. So we've got day 1 water world. Day 1 creation event is separating light from darkness. Then we have day 2, it's still water world, but now we have, this is the way my mind perceives this unimaginably thick layer of water. And it's Elohim's intention to create a space within this water for a habitable human condition, a place where humanity can live. So we've got this thick layer of water, and right in the middle, Elohim creates a space, waters above the firmament and waters below the firmament, and the space now where humanity can exist. And this is a speculation too, but day 2 does not get the evaluation from Elohim that it is good. And thoughts are still forming in my mind on this, but I wonder if the reason day 2 does not get the evaluation of it is good is because Elohim knows in advance that he's going to have to judge the earth. This habitable human space that he created between waters above and waters below are going to have to be judged, and it's going to be judged through the waters below the fountains of the great deep and the heavens, the windows of heaven being open. This collapse is going to fall upon man. Waters below, waters above are going to collapse. They're going to re-merge with one another. And it is going to destroy all habitable human space as a result of our corruption. So that's just speculative. Praying about it, wondering what any future insights might come, worthy of being meditated upon for anybody out there listening. But what we see in Genesis 7, and then let's just go there, is the judgment of the earth now is moving forward. Verse 11, Genesis chapter 7, verse 11. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, the waters below and the windows of heaven were opened, and rain was on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. So we have a very clear parallel between Genesis 1 and Genesis 7. I was wondering if there was a connection between Genesis 2. Is there a destruction narrative kind of hidden in the Genesis 7 storyline that relates to Genesis 2? And what I found, and again, this is still coming into focus for me, so this is hot off the press. This very curious mention in Genesis 7, beginning in verse 17. Back in Genesis 2, this idea of the four rivers emerges. So we have in Genesis 2, waters doing something different in the second creation narrative than waters are doing in the first creation narrative. In the first creation narrative, God is creating habitable human space between the waters. In Genesis 2 creation narrative, we have now four rivers. Water, we have the one source of water, the Echad source of water, flowing from Eden, beginning in verse 10. Now a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from there it parted and became four riverheads. Again, earlier in one of my sessions, I talked about the difference between Rosh and Bereshit. Both are the source. We have Bereshit as the source in Genesis 1, and we have Rosh being used here for the source. Anyhow, these four rivers, the Pishon, the Gihon, the Hiddekel, and the Euphrates, all have a common source of water. This is the Echad source. This is the head, the Rosh of the rivers, is this garden that comes from Eden. So we have a different kind of beginning taking place here. And again, this stuff is coming into focus. I don't have a lot of more input than just to see it, that there's something there resonating. So these four rivers are a result of this one river. And what's very interesting in chapter 7, beginning in verse 17, we have again the mention of four or four sources of water. I mean, it's just very curious. Why would the author with a capital A repeat himself four times having to do with water? I think there's a parallel to these four waters in Genesis chapter 2. But listen, now the flood was on the earth 40 days. The waters increased and lifted up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. And the waters prevailed exceedingly on the earth, and all the hills under the whole of heaven were covered. Then the waters prevailed 15 cubits upward, and the mountains were covered, and all flesh died on the earth, and every creeping thing. Oh, I left out a verse. Let's start over. Okay, now the flood was on the earth 40 days. The waters increased and lifted up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters prevailed and greatly increased on the earth, and the ark moved about on the surface of the waters. The waters prevailed exceedingly on the earth, and all the high hills under the whole heaven were covered, and the waters prevailed 15 cubits upward, and the mountains were covered. So we have the waters lifting up the ark. We have the waters prevailing, and the ark moved about on the surface of the waters. We have the waters prevailing exceedingly on the earth, and they covered all the high hills. Then we have the waters prevailed 15 cubits upward above the mountains, and the mountains were covered. So we have waters, 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 and waters. Twice the waters have to do with lifting up the ark, and twice the waters have to do with covering the hills and the mountains. So to me, I see a parallel. I see a very clear parallel, not only between Genesis 1 waters below and waters above collapsing now, the fountains of the great deep being broken up, and the windows of heaven being opened, and that space, that habitable human space that God created for mankind, are now collapsed. They're being sandwiched between the waters above and the waters below. But I also see the waters of these rivers overflowing their banks now. So we have Genesis 1 water story, we have Genesis 2 water story. And both of those are echoed in Genesis 8. Genesis 8 would be the parallel to Genesis 1, and Genesis 7 would be parallel to Genesis 2. So it's almost as if we have this kind of reversal going on again in what is taking place with the water. So I find that very interesting. And again, hot off the press, not a lot of depth here. I feel like there's something here, and there's something here that's worthy of meditation and consideration. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to consider prayerfully what this might mean, and any further interpretation I'll share with you. But right now, I think I'll just cut it off here. And we'll pick up with session 19, and we'll go into, from there, we're going to go do the parallels stop with the days of creation, or do they continue into the Noah life? And what I think we'll find is that Noah actually seems to follow the trajectory. This second Adam, barren Adam, seems to follow the same trajectory of doing Adam. And we'll take a closer look at that in our next session. Thank you so much for your time. I hope these studies are fruitful for you, and that I will see you again in session 19 of the Four Rivers of Eden. Thank you.